Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History. I am your host, Mr. Merrigan. So, we're going to begin our unit here on the Jackson era. We're going to talk about how Andrew Jackson makes his way into the presidency. But we'll start with this image, and one of the things that I like about this image is that it kind of helps to demonstrate how John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson both kind of ushered in a new way of campaigning, and one that certainly we still see in our society today. And this is being recorded in 2020. So, take a quick look at our main idea or our learning target for today. We're going to be able to identify how John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson introduced these new ways of campaigning in presidential elections. We're going to start with 1824 and then also look at 1828 today. So, one of the things that we've seen certainly has been a trend since Washington is that presidents serve 2 terms and then they leave. Well, that's going to continue certainly with Monroe, and that's kind of where we left off in our last unit was with the Monroe Doctrine. President Monroe is going to decline to seek a 3rd term, and so you're going to have 4 Republicans who are going to be competing for the presidency in 1824. First one is William H. Crawford, Georgia. You're also going to have Henry Clay of Kentucky. We talked about him as a great representative for the West when we were talking about sectionalism in our last unit. And of course, he'll come up again. We also have Andrew Jackson, of course, of Tennessee. And then we have John Quincy Adams, son of John Adams, the 2nd president and 1st vice president of the United States from Massachusetts. And so we head into this election and we see that we are left with no clear winner. Jackson is going to win a plurality. What that means is he wins the most, he has the largest single shares of the electoral votes when it comes to the presidency. But he does not receive a majority, so more than half. So we don't have a clear winner. So the electoral votes get split enough that it has to make its way to the House of Representatives. And we've already seen this happen in U.S. history. We saw it in the election of 1800. So you're going to have the House of Representatives select a new president. Now, John Quincy Adams is an advocate of strong national programs and improvements, much like some of the other Republicans that we've seen at this time. However, you're going to have a split here. And so he gets chosen, but what makes this an interesting election, and probably there was some backdoor dealing here, is that Henry Clay, who remember was one of the candidates, he gets to become Secretary of State. And so we're left to question, was there a backdoor deal here that allowed Henry Clay to become Secretary of State in exchange for supporting John Quincy Adams over, say, himself or perhaps Andrew Jackson? So again, John Quincy Adams is going to end up winning the election of 1824, probably with some backdoor dealing. By the time we get to 1828, you're going to see the Republican Party is going to become divided into 2 separate parties. You're going to have the Democratic Republicans who are going to coalesce behind Andrew Jackson again, and they're big proponents and supporters of states' rights. Then you're going to have the National Republicans who are going to support Adams, and they're going to favor a strong central government. So you're going to see a divide here in the party. Now, certainly some new aspects, and this is kind of where our learning target comes in, began to emerge in this election. So one of the first ones that we certainly see is mudslinging. And those of you who follow modern politics, and especially when this is being recorded just after the election of 2020, you'll be familiar with this. It's mudslinging. These are attempts to ruin the opponent's reputation with insults. Now, certainly if you look back at 1800, you'll see that this was certainly done between presidential candidates, but it certainly is increased in 1824. You're also going to see that campaigns are going to adopt slogans. So like in 2020 now, we've heard slogans like keep America great again, or restoring the soul of America. And so certainly those slogans, and we're going to have a lot of examples. I like Ike. certainly among the more famous of them, and you'll see those throughout U.S. history. You're also going to see rallies and certainly other events, campaign conventions, and then you're going to, of course, see campaign buttons and other souvenirs as a way of attracting voters. So we get to the election, and Jackson is going to win in a landslide. What that means is he's going to have an overwhelming victory in the election. This is, again, the election of 1828. So to kind of connect it back to our time period, how do you think candidates today use technology to reach their voters, especially in the election of 2020? Of course, we're dealing with COVID-19 pandemic. Certainly, technology became even more important. So think about to yourself here for a moment why and how Joe Biden used technology and how and why Donald Trump used technology in order to reach their voters. All right, let's continue. So one quick thing we're going to look at, again, another major idea is how Andrew Jackson made the American political system more democratic. In some ways, he's going to bring more people into the voting bloc, but it's going to largely ignore still large parts of the population. So Andrew Jackson kind of claimed himself to be a man of the common people and less of an elitist. And in some ways, he actually represents a major change in the kind of presidents that we have. And so he promotes this equal protection, equal benefits for all Americans. He is going to attempt to make it easier for men, I should emphasize this, men who did not own property to vote. Because largely up to this point, you had to be a landowning white male in order to vote. And so Jackson sees it as an advantage to him to incorporate people such as male sharecroppers, factory workers, and others to participate in the electoral process and the election process. But again, largely he's going to leave out women, Native Americans, African Americans, who are still going to be denied suffrage, which is the right to vote. And so while you are going to have universal suffrage for white men in this election, certainly Native Americans, African Americans, and women are still going to be denied their opportunity to vote. And again, throughout this year, we'll talk about where those rights come in for these three groups and others to vote in the United States. Andrew Jackson is also going to introduce and bring in the spoils system. This is the practice of handing out government jobs to your supporters. So in a thanks for supporting me for president, he's going to replace these government employees who have made it their job through multiple presidencies to take on certain roles. Jackson's going to hand those to his supporters. And in some cases, it's an awful decision. In some cases, it kind of works. So Jackson's supporters also are going to change the electoral process. They eliminate the caucus system, which is a meeting that's held by a political party to choose its candidates for president and to decide on policy. Now, we still sort of see caucuses in some small examples in the United States today, like the Iowa caucus, in the nomination process for both political parties. But it's largely been replaced, and it is in this time period, by the nominating conventions. It's a system in which delegates from states select the parties for the presidential candidates. So certainly for 2020 and a lot of elections after 1828, you see this process. So just to kind of give you an example, this one was from 2012, the Republican National Convention, but certainly 2020 also certainly had these as well. But again, each state has delegates. Based on the popular vote, those delegates then put their support behind the candidate that got the majority in their state. Or if they split their electorates, they base it on the percentage of the vote that each candidate got in the nomination process. Quick discussion question, just to make sure that you're kind of following along with us. Who could vote for the presidential elections of the 1820s? So is it females, African Americans, white males, or Native Americans? Take a quick second, think about it. Hopefully you said white males. Okay. They are the ones who can vote in the elections in the 1820s. Last thing we're going to talk about for today and kind of our last learning objective, I can explain how a fight over tariffs ignited a crisis on the question of states' rights versus the rights of the federal government. Now remember, government in this system is federalism. The federal government always outweighs state governments. But we're going to have a little fight here over tariffs. And just a reminder, a tariff is a tax that is put on imports or exports. And there was a tariff put in place, multiple tariffs, to promote American-made goods over European ones. And this, of course, would favor northeastern factory owners. Well, southern states, remember, have the plantation system. And we talked about our representative of the South for sectionalism. That was John C. Calhoun. He argued that the states had the right to nullify, which means to cancel or make ineffective a federal law that was considered to be against their state interests. Okay, so he's a very strong mistrust of central government. And that's going to lead him to help push against this new tariff. And that's where we're going to kind of get into some trouble. See, South Carolina passes something called the Nullification Act in 1832. They were actually threatening to secede or to leave or withdraw from the Union if the federal government interfered. So this kind of goes back and forth. You've got certainly John C. Calhoun and the state government of South Carolina kind of going up against Andrew Jackson. They go back and forth. Now, eventually they're going to reach a compromise. But this is one of those events in history that states' rights was beginning to create and amplify sectionalism, and certainly helps to get us closer to civil war. Ultimately, slavery is going to be the largest contributing factor. But this proved that there was tension between those who supported states' rights and those who supported a stronger federal government. Again, eventually, that certainly is one of those factors that brings us closer to our next big event, which of course is the Civil War. And of course, slavery being the largest contributing factor there by far. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. So certainly we're seeing that sectionalism divide, and we see tension brewing. I want to thank my students for following along. Hopefully, if you've got any questions, please ask them, but hopefully you've been following along with the guided notes. Those of you who are just listening, really appreciate your time. Thanks for listening. Hopefully we gave you some more context for the history of our nation. That's going to do it for now. And that ends another episode of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History. Thank you, everyone.